When I was growing up, my house was very messy. Well, that's a bit misleading. My mother was what I now know as a hoarder. I believed her justifications for it back then. I saw the logic in her reasoning. Everything might be useful eventually, and sure, maybe some things will be. But trash? Actual garbage? Refuse and waste and rotted things that stink so badly you couldn't even breathe without wanting to vomit? That isn't useful. That could never be useful. It can be very scary, though. My mother wasn't always like that. She had never been a lazy woman, and she preferred to keep things tidy. I remember the house always being clean. My mother always worried that unused items or toys were in their designated place. But then when I was 7, my older brother Jordan died. That's when it started. It was unexpected. Jordan had been working nights as a forklift driver at a shipping warehouse in town. I didn't really understand the full story at the time. I just remember my mom coming in sobbing and screaming in the middle of the night, saying we had to get ready to go to the hospital. So she bundled me up against winter's bite as best she could, and we left. She sped the entire way to the hospital, even though the roads were icy. We arrived at the hospital, and my mom went into the room by herself. Apparently, when we got there, Jordan was still technically alive, but there was no saving him. A different forklift driver had fallen asleep with his foot on the gas, ramming into one of the shelves hard enough to knock it down. My brother was crushed under who knows how many pounds of product and steel. It was a miracle he had survived as long as he did. The funeral was a closed casket affair, and I'm very thankful for that. After the funeral, my mother was tasked with sorting through all of Jordan's stuff. He didn't own much, at least not much of real value. She couldn't get rid of any of it. Not his car or his computer or his clothes. Nothing. She just couldn't let go. Once, when she was drunk enough to be open about her actual feelings, she told me that she felt like if she threw any of his things away, then it was her accepting that she'd never see him again. And I understand why she would have felt that way. But over the years, that same desire to hold on seeped into the rest of our lives. It started with things. Once the lawsuit against Jordan's employer had been settled, my mom found herself with quite a lot of money. She would buy appliances and gadgets she'd never use, clothes she'd never wear, food she'd never eat. Just anything to try to fill the void, I think. Those wasted dollars sat around and began to clutter the house. First it was the closets, then the countertops and tables, then the hallways, then the floors, until we had to carve a path from the front door to our bedrooms and the bathrooms. You couldn't walk anywhere else. The trash started after that. Used to, my mother would take the trash out every day. Then it became every week, and then every month. Eventually, she just started setting the bags in the garage and leaving them. Once the garage was full and so pungently disgusting that the smell from it radiated into the walls of our home, she just left the bags sitting around the house. At least, until she stopped using them altogether. I started getting bullied at school for the way I smelled. My clothes weren't dirty and I showered extensively every day, but that awful stench permeated everything I owned. It soaked into my skin and my hair. I couldn't escape it, no matter how much I washed and scrubbed, no matter how clean I kept my own room. My friends joined on the bullying as well, once they couldn't stand to be around me anymore. Teachers would pull me aside and talk to me about my scent, ask me if things were okay at home. I didn't know what to tell them. I promised to shower better. It didn't take long for me to decide that I needed to clean that house, by myself if I had to. I didn't realize what a Herculean effort that would be. There was no chance I could have done it alone. When my mother caught me cleaning and taking the garbage to the cans by the street, she yelled at me. It was the first time I ever remember her doing it. She screamed like she'd been shot and berated me for throwing away her useful things. I don't even remember the whole thing. I just remember dropping my half-filled garbage bag and running to my bedroom in tears. I didn't come out for 2 days, and she never checked on me. Things didn't get much better between us as I continued to grow. I simply accepted that my mother was gone, given in to the despair of having lost both her husband and a child. It didn't matter that I was still there. Her heart had been fractured, and she had lost too many pieces of herself. When I was 18, I went off to college. I picked the farthest away in-state school that I could to try to escape the trash and my mother. I cleaned and bathed obsessively. I made sure that my apartment and body were as clean as possible at all times. Yet that wretched smell still clung to me, at times so powerful that it choked me and brought stinging tears to my eyes. I asked my mother for money, and she obliged with the same apathy that had simply become who she was. I threw away everything in my closet and bought a whole new wardrobe. I bought new books, I bought new consoles and video games and everything else. And still, that smell never left me. I didn't go back home much during those years. Sometimes on Thanksgiving or Christmas, when I was feeling nostalgic, I'd surprise my mother with some food and a quick visit. I say surprise, but it didn't seem like my being there changed her mood or attitude at all. Just always emptiness, like she was devoid of feeling entirely now. I wish I could say that I didn't hate my mother for that. I know she lost a son, and I know that I don't know how painful that feeling is, but I was her son too. I needed her. I had no father. My only brother was gone. I needed her. And she disappeared on me. In time, I came to liken her as another piece of trash that needed to be thrown out of my life. And that's exactly what I did after getting my degree. I moved out of state, I got a job in my field, and after a while, the smell went away. My life was finally good. I met a girl, we dated for a few years, and then when I was 30, we got married. It was the best day of my life. We had a beautiful ceremony and a fantastic reception. We were surrounded by the friends and family I had always wanted, but could never obtain because of my mother and the trash. Last year is when I got the call. It must have been 3 a.m. My phone blared and buzzed with the sound of its ringtone, waking my wife and our newborn son as well as me. The number was one I didn't have saved, but I did recognize the area code. My hometown. Probably just a coincidence. My mother hadn't tried to contact me once since I left, and it wasn't like I had friends. I ignored the call and put my phone on Do Not Disturb before helping my wife get our son back to sleep. The phone rang again. Full sound. I ignored the call and checked to be sure that I had actually turned on Do Not Disturb. I had. The phone rang again. My son began to cry. My wife gave me a grave look and nodded. I answered the phone, ready to explode with anger at this inconsiderate stranger for harassing my family in the middle of the night, but I never would have expected what I heard when I pressed that button. "Please," my mother said softly, with a sharp fear in her voice. "Please, Tyson, you have to come save me." She had clearly been crying. I was in shock. My jaw hung open and my heart raced. Why was my mother calling me for help? How did she even get my number? What she needed help with wasn't on my mind. Helping her wasn't even conceivable for me at the time. She was hours away, too far to drive, but too close to fly. "Please," she screamed loudly this time. "Please, Tyson, I'm begging you, you have to..." The line went dead. The call dropped. My son cried and my wife tried to comfort him. I sat in dazed disbelief. I tried to call the number back, but all I ever got was automated messages that the number was no longer in service. My wife said that I should go home to check on her. I reluctantly packed an overnight bag and left. The drive home was strange. I don't remember long stretches of the journey, but I do remember that I didn't see one single other vehicle during the entire 10-hour trip. Not even when I stopped for gas. The store had been closed with a sign on the door that said "Pump Still Work." I paid at the pump with my card and I left, not thinking anything of it. When I finally got off the highway and began to drive through Ravenwood, the painful memories of my childhood hit me like a punch in the gut. I had come so far. I had gotten away from all this, so why was I coming back? I parked my car in the driveway, behind the now rusted skeleton of my brother's beloved Mustang. My mother's hoarding had extended beyond the house, with several broken appliances, bags of trash, and what looked like barbed wire scattered throughout the overgrown lawn. The stench had struck me well before I could even see the house, but actually being there, I vomited. My stomach convulsed with each breath I took as I climbed the short steps to the front door. Unease coursed through my veins and my muscles tensed with each step that brought me closer. I didn't want to go in. I didn't want to be there. But I was. I rang the doorbell and waited. My mother didn't come. I tried again several times. And then I knocked. And I knocked. And I knocked. And then I banged on the door and shouted, embarrassed that one of the neighbors might see me, but there was no one around. Finally, I realized that despite how much I had tried to run away from it my entire life, this had once been my home. I could just go inside. I tried, and the door was unlocked, so I entered. That was a mistake. The door barely opened wide enough for me to step inside, having to do so over piles of garbage bags and rotted food that stood almost waist-high in some places. A swirl of nauseating smells assaulted my senses, and I vomited again. I shouted for my mother and received no response. I shouted again, making as much noise as possible, in hopes that she was simply sleeping and I would wake her up. No answer ever came. Navigating that house was a trauma I would not wish on anyone. There was no longer a path, and often I found myself having to climb over the piles of trash in order to advance. Once I stuck my hand in a warm, wet, wiggling mass. I don't know why I looked down. A swarm of maggots crawled throughout some unrecognizable putrefied creature, and I had stuck my hand right in it. I panicked. I screamed as I shook my hand and beat it against the wall, trying to kill and remove all the disgusting things. I vomited again, this time only bile. My stomach twisted in knots. I didn't want to go on. I wanted to turn around and leave and never look back. But I couldn't. Eventually, I got to my mother's bedroom. The door was closed, and it seemed to be bulging out of the frame. Flies covered it, leaving only small patches of a sickly yellow color visible between the scurrying, buzzing sea of black. I approached slowly. The flies were unfazed by my presence. I tried to swat them away as they flew around and landed on me, but there were too many. They landed on my face and my hands, crawling across me in a way that made me itch immediately. I grabbed the doorknob and turned it. I pushed inward, expecting resistance, but instead the door flung open easily, and I stumbled inside the room. There were no lights on in there. Something that might have once been curtains covered the windows, filtering the sun's warm light into a pale, nasty green. I heard the most horrible sound. Wet, mushy chewing with the occasional painful-sounding crunch, like the breaking of a tooth. This made me retch again. I surveyed the room, trying to find what made this noise, but everything seemed to be amorphous blobs of shadow in the dim, nauseating light. And then I saw it, at the center of the room. It was there, fused to the bed, like some strange mermaid. The creature used to be my mother, I think. Or it ain't her, but it was not her. It was enormously large, as wide as the mattress and taller than me. Both of its arms scooped handfuls of the liquefying garbage surrounding it and shoveled them into its mouth. Revulsion shot through every atom of my being, and I shivered. And I walked forward anyway. That thing's mouth was massive and had far too many teeth. It seemed to be a mass of diseased fat with jaundiced skin pockmarked by oozing bulbous sores. More maggots crawled in and out of necrotic flesh around its arms and the mattress. I watched as it received another mass of sopping sludge. The creature feasted upon it with a joy and delight that haunts me to this day. But its eyes were the same color as my mother's. I turned and ran, but I slipped on the slimy, rotting floorboards. I fell hard, hurting my wrists. I cried out in pain. The mushy chewing stopped. "Tyson?" the creature said slowly. Utter horror struck me. I screamed and screamed as I scrambled to get back on my feet. "Tyson," it said again. "I need your help." I was back on my feet. I ran again. I leapt over garbage heaps and dived down the staircase, landing in a pile of trash and hitting my head hard. As I escaped back outside, I noticed a can of gasoline sitting beside the garage door. I had a lighter in my pocket from our camping trip last weekend. The gasoline overpowered the putrid stink of the house as I poured it over every surface. A crinkled old copy of the local paper served as an excellent wick. I lit it and threw it in the door. The explosion knocked me back a bit and gave me some surface burns, but I made sure that house was on fire before I left. No one saw me, and I didn't see another car again until I was 2 hours outside of Ravenwood. I used the shower at a truck stop until the manager came and asked me to leave. I still don't feel clean. I probably never will. 2 days after I got home, I was contacted by a distant cousin who informed me that my childhood home had burned down. Nothing could be salvaged, and there was no sign of my mother's corpse. My wife didn't ask me any questions. My only regret is that I went back at all.